Boston, Massachusetts. The city always wakes up early, and the first rays of sun dance over the waters of the Charles River. Between the Victorian architecture buildings and the distant sound of morning traffic, Dr. Emily Carson, a renowned intensive care doctor, walks hurriedly through the streets of Back Bay. Although recognized for her competence and dedication, Emily is on the verge of collapse. The weight of years working on the front lines of medicine, coupled with frustration with the how she used to be passionate about medicine. She still remembered the day when at the age of 6, she decided she wanted to save lives, inspired by her grandmother's battle with cancer. But now, the passion has been replaced by unbearable weariness and corrosive cynicism. The days are long, the nights are sleepless, and lately the idea of giving up, of simply dropping everything and disappearing, has been temptingly frequent. On that particular day, Emily is on her way to another exhausting shift. Your head throbs with persistent pain, the result of sleepless nights and constant worries. She walks through Copley Square Park, where the autumn leaves fall in gentle swirls, without even noticing the beauty around her. It's then that a gentle touch on her shoulder makes her stop abruptly. An elderly, frail-looking man with white hair and wrinkled skin stands at his side. He wears a shabby coat and holds a cane. With a shy smile, he asks if she could help him cross the street. Emily hesitates for a moment. She's late and tiredness screams through her body, but something in the man's eyes makes her stop. It's a look she recognizes, although she can't remember where. With a sigh, she nods, offering her arm for him to lean on. As they cross the street, the man, whose name is Harold Bennett, thanks her warmly. There's something comforting in her voice, something that begins to break through the ice barrier Emily has built around herself. When they reach the other side, he turns to her, with a serious and at the same time gentle expression. "I've waited a long time to find you, Dr. Carson," he says, and his words make Emily stop breathing for a moment. He says he is the grandfather of a patient she treated years ago, a young woman named Sarah. Harold explains that Sarah passed away, but before leaving he made a promise to his grandfather. He should find the doctor who did everything to save her and tell her something important. Emily feels the ground shake beneath her feet. She remembers Sarah, a teenager who fought bravely against an incurable disease, and who, despite her best efforts, was unable to save. That loss left a deep mark on her soul, although she buried those emotions beneath layers of incessant work. Harold holds Emily's hand tightly, his eyes full of emotion. "Sarah said that despite everything, you gave her something no one else could, hope. And she asked me to tell you that, although you didn't win the battle, you made her last days the most meaningful of her life." These words pierce Emily's heart like an arrow. The emotional barrier she built begins to crumble, and tears she didn't know she could still shed fill her eyes. She tries to respond, but the words fail her. "I have something for you," Harold continues, pulling a small box from his coat pocket. Inside is a simple necklace with a star-shaped pendant, which belonged to Sarah. She wanted you to have it, as a reminder that even when the battle seems lost, what you do matters. Emily takes the necklace with shaking hands. The coldness that enveloped her begins to melt, replaced by a bittersweet pain. It's as if, for the first time in a long time, she can breathe again, feel again. Sarah's gratitude and love, transmitted through her grandfather, bring new light to the darkness that enveloped her. As Harold says goodbye and slowly walks away, Emily remains there, on the sidewalk, holding the necklace. She looks up at the sky, where the clouds part to reveal a clear blue, and realizes that maybe there is still hope for her too. A promise was kept, but a new journey has just begun for Emily. In the days following her meeting with Harold Bennett, Emily Carson's mind is a whirlwind of emotions. The necklace with the star pendant never leaves her neck, and every time she feels it against her skin, it's as if a part of Sarah is with her. But at the same time, this constant reminder brings to the surface all the feelings that Emily worked so hard to suppress. The pain of loss, the weight of the lives she was unable to save, and the growing frustration with the healthcare system that often Emily tries to focus on work, but each day at the hospital seems harder than the last. She feels suffocated by bureaucracy, by administrative decisions that put profits above patients, and by the coldness of colleagues who, like her, have been hardened by time and pressure. She begins to question whether all this is worth it, whether she is really making the difference she once dreamed of making. Colleagues notice the change. Dr. Richard Lawson, head of the ICU and Emily's mentor, calls her in for a private conversation. "Emily, you've been different lately. I know this job is hard, and that you've been through a lot. But something seems to be eating at you," he observes with a tone of genuine concern. Emily, however, cannot fully express what she feels. She is on edge, and Harold's words and Sarah's memory are both a source of comfort and pain. She considers, for the first time, leaving medicine behind. The idea of moving on with your life, away from pressure and expectations, seems more and more attractive. But at the same time, she knows that if she gives up now, something essential within her will be lost forever. The last straw comes when a young patient with a critical condition is admitted to the ICU. The case is complex, and the chances of survival are low. Emily throws herself into her work, determined to save this life, as a way to prove to herself that she can still make a difference. But despite his efforts, the patient does not survive. During the wake, the young man's parents, devastated by their loss, thank Emily for her efforts. But the words fall on deaf ears. She can only feel the weight of failure. The young man's face blends with Sarah's in his mind, and the pain becomes unbearable. She leaves the room, suffocated by sadness, and goes to the hospital chapel, where she kneels, finally allowing the tears she held in for so long to flow freely. That night, lying in her bed, Emily looks at the star necklace, and an idea begins to form in her mind. She remembers Harold's words about how, even in her last moments, she managed to give Sarah hope. And then you ask yourself, how could you honor that promise? How could I turn this pain into something positive? The next morning, Emily wakes up with new determination. She decides that instead of abandoning medicine, she will fight against the system that has frustrated her so much. She begins to plan how to use her experience and position to create change, however small, within the hospital. She approaches other doctors who share her concerns, and together they begin to discuss ways to improve patient care, from reducing bureaucracy to implementing more humanized protocols. The fight is hard. Emily faces resistance from all sides, from managers who see her ideas as a threat to profits, from colleagues who are too cynical to believe in change, and even from her own exhaustion. But something inside her changed. Every time she feels like she can't go on, she remembers Harold's words, Sarah's smile, and all the patients who trusted her to do what was right. One of the biggest challenges arises when Emily decides to organize a meeting with the hospital board to discuss her proposals. It's a huge risk, and she knows that if she fails, she could be fired. But she also knows that if she doesn't try, she will be betraying everything she believes in. On the day of the meeting, Emily is nervous but also surprisingly calm. She enters the meeting room where the faces of the directors look at her with expressions ranging from skepticism to curiosity. She begins her presentation by talking about Sarah, about how that unexpected encounter with Harold Bennett made her rethink her entire approach to medicine. She presents her proposals with passion and clarity, arguing that the hospital has a responsibility to put patients first, not profits. The meeting is tense, and the directors are not easily convinced. They question, criticize, and even ridicule some of your ideas. But Emily remains steadfast, responding to each challenge with solid arguments and evidence of how her proposals could benefit both patients and the hospital's reputation. When the meeting finally ends, Emily is exhausted but relieved. She doesn't know if her proposals will be accepted, but something has changed inside her. For the first time in a long time, she feels like she's done something that really matters. In the days that follow, Emily receives unexpected support from some colleagues and even patients who heard about her initiative. Small changes begin to be implemented, and although the road is long and arduous, she knows she is heading in the right direction. The weeks pass, and the seeds that Emily planted begin to bear fruit. Small but significant changes at the hospital begin to occur. Some of the bureaucratic procedures are simplified, which allows doctors and nurses to spend more time with patients. Furthermore, A new emotional support program for terminally ill patients inspired by Sarah's story is implemented, providing more humanized care. Emily feels like, for the first time in a long time, she is regaining control of her life and career. The star pendant necklace became a symbol of her renewed determination and purpose. She still faces challenges and resistance, but now she feels like she's fighting for something that really matters. However, the calm is interrupted by devastating news. A local newspaper publishes an article alleging that the hospital is under investigation for a series of unexplained deaths that have occurred in recent months. The report suggests that the administration has covered up medical errors and negligence, leading to a crisis of trust among patients and the community. Emily is taken by surprise. Although he knows that the hospital is facing problems, he never imagined the situation would be so serious. She fears that her initiatives could be seen as an attempt to divert attention from these larger problems, which would put all her work at risk. The situation worsens when the hospital administration calls an emergency meeting. Hospital director Dr. Robert Hale, a man known for his cold and calculating approach, is the first to speak. He minimizes the report, claiming that the accusations are unfounded and that the situation is under control. However, Emily notices the tension on the director's faces and senses that there is something more going on. After the meeting, Emily is approached by a veteran nurse, Julia, who has worked at the hospital for over 30 years. Julia is a woman of few words, but her concern is evident. "Emily, something is very wrong. There are things going on behind the scenes that you need to know about," she says in a whisper, looking around to make sure no one is listening. Julia reveals that in recent months there has been an alarming increase in cases of critically ill patients dying under suspicious circumstances. She suspects that medical errors and even unethical practices may be being covered up by management, all in the name of protecting the hospital's reputation. "They're more concerned about numbers than lives," Julia says with a look of disgust. Emily feels a chill down her spine. If the accusations are true, it would mean that the hospital where he dedicated his life, and which is struggling to improve, is compromised in a much deeper way than imagined. She finds herself at a crossroads. Should she confront the administration and risk her career, or remain silent and preserve what she has built so far? The decision is made even more difficult when Emily discovers that the young patient who recently died under her care was mentioned in the investigation. Although she followed all the procedures, she knows that the system was failing, and that perhaps, if conditions had been different, he could have survived. Guilt begins to eat away at Emily. She remembers Sarah and the promise she made to herself to honor her memory. How could she continue fighting for change knowing that the system she defends could be killing people? Tensions rise when Harold Bennett reappears. He looks for Emily at the hospital, this time with a dark look. "Emily, I heard about what's happening. I don't want what happened to my granddaughter to happen to anyone else," he says, his voice thick with pain. "I know you're a good doctor, but the stakes are bigger than any of us." These words weigh like an anchor in Emily's heart. Harold encourages her to seek the truth, no matter how painful it may be. He reminds her that her strength doesn't just come from her ability to save lives, but from the courage to fight for what's right, even when the world seems to be against her. Determined, Emily decides to investigate on her own. She starts gathering documents, reviewing medical records, and talking to trusted employees. What she discovers is terrifying. Evidence of negligence, omissions of information in medical reports, and pressures to cover up mistakes to avoid lawsuits. Emily feels the weight of her discovery. She knows that if she reveals this information, she could destroy her career and even face retaliation from the hospital administration. But she also knows that if she stays silent, she will be betraying everything she believes in and all the lives she swore to protect. However, the real turning point comes when Emily finds a letter hidden among Sarah's documents. The letter, written in the last days of the young woman's life, is addressed to Emily. In it, Sarah expresses her gratitude and hope that Emily will never give up fighting for what is right. "Even when all seems lost, remember that you made a difference to me, and that's what matters." This letter is the spark Emily needed. She decides that she can no longer ignore what is happening and that she must act, whatever the cost. After reading Sarah's letter, Emily feels a new strength awaken within her. The decision to face the truth and fight corruption at the hospital is both frightening and liberating. She knows the road ahead will be difficult, but she feels she is on the right path. Emily's first step is to look for Julia, the nurse who initially raised suspicions about the unexplained deaths. Together, they begin to compile all the evidence they have managed to gather. Emily knows she will need irrefutable evidence to face the administration and possibly the authorities. They work long hours, reviewing charts, talking to other employees they can trust, and documenting every detail. However, things start to get complicated when the hospital administration realizes something is happening. Emily is called into a performance review meeting with Dr. Robert Hale, the hospital director. During the meeting, Hale confronts her directly, insinuating that he knows Emily is investigating matters outside of her purview. He tries to intimidate her by suggesting that continuing in this direction could result in the loss of her medical license. "You need to understand that certain aspects of this hospital need to be managed strategically," says Hale with a cool smile. "And unfortunately, not everyone can have access to all information. This is for the greater good, Dr. Carson. Think this through." Emily leaves the meeting feeling the weight of the threat. She knows she is dealing with powerful people who will not hesitate to destroy her if she continues to challenge the status quo. But giving up is not an option. She returns to work with even more determination, aware that she is now in a race against time. Meanwhile, the atmosphere at the hospital begins to change. The tension is palpable among the employees who suspect something big is about to happen. Some begin to avoid Emily, fearing associations with possible exposure, while others discreetly encourage her, leaving messages of support in her locker or whispering words of encouragement in the hallways. Among the few who remain steadfast by Emily's side is Dr. Richard Lawson, her mentor. He, who has always believed in Emily's potential, decides to join her in the investigation. "You don't have to do this alone," he says, aware of the risks they are both taking. "If we're going to fight for something, let it be together." With Lawson's help, Emily is able to access confidential documents that confirm her suspicions. There have been a series of cover-ups of medical errors and unethical practices, all conducted or approved by senior management to avoid scandals and lawsuits. These practices, in addition to being immoral, put lives at risk and resulted in deaths that could have been avoided. However, the challenges intensify when Emily begins receiving anonymous threats. Messages left at her home and at the hospital, warning her to give up while she can. Her car is vandalized, and she realizes she is being followed. The pressure begins to affect Emily deeply. She feels fear, real fear for her safety, but the thought of retreating now is inconceivable. She cannot betray Sarah's memory, nor all the other lives that could be saved. The situation reaches a critical point when Harold Bennett, Sarah's grandfather, contacts Emily once again. He reveals that he also received threats and that his house was invaded, possibly by people linked to the hospital administration. "They want to shut me up, but that only makes me more certain that you're on the right path," says Harold, with a firmness that touches Emily deeply. Determined to help, Harold suggests they go public. He has contacts in the media and believes that if the story comes out, public pressure will stop the hospital administration from continuing their corrupt practices, and more importantly, stop them from silencing Emily and the others involved. However, this would mean completely exposing Emily's life, putting her career and even her personal safety at risk. After a long night of reflection, Emily decides she is ready to face the consequences. Along with Harold and Dr. Lawson, she organizes a press conference. The event is carefully planned to ensure that all the evidence is presented clearly and convincingly, and that the message is heard by all. The system that was supposed to protect patients has failed, but it is not too late to right this wrong. On the day of the press conference, Emily is nervous, but her determination overcomes her fear. The room is full of journalists, cameras and microphones pointed at her. Beside you, Harold holds your hand in a silent gesture of support. She takes a deep breath and begins to speak, telling Sarah's story, the problems she discovered at the hospital, and the evidence they have in their hands. She spares no detail, exposing the unethical practices and negligence that led to the deaths of innocent Patty. As Emily speaks, a heavy silence falls over the room. Journalists absorb every word, aware of the seriousness of the accusations. When she finishes, the room explodes with questions and camera flashes. Emily knows that from this moment on, her life will never be the same. However, the public response is overwhelming. The story makes headlines across the country, sparking a scandal that puts the hospital and its administration under federal investigation. Patients and families of victims are beginning to speak out, revealing their own experiences of neglect and cover-ups. In the following days, public pressure increases, and the hospital is forced to suspend several members of management, including Dr. Robert Hale, while investigations continue. Emily becomes a public figure, seen by many as a hero who had the courage to stand up to a corrupt system. Despite the whirlwind of events, Emily feels an inner peace she hasn't experienced in years. She knows the road ahead will still be difficult, but she also knows she made the right decision. Sarah's letter, which she keeps tucked away next to her star necklace, is a constant reminder that even in the darkest of times there is hope. The days following the press conference are chaotic. Emily finds herself at the center of a media hurricane, with journalists constantly seeking interviews and new information. She receives both support and criticism, but remains focused on what really matters, ensuring that the truth prevails and that the hospital is held accountable for its corrupt practices. Official investigations begin, and the hospital administration desperately tries to contain the damage. Dr. Robert Hale, who until then was the public face of the hospital, disappears from the spotlight, replaced by lawyers seeking to minimize the legal consequences. The medical community is also divided. While some applaud Emily's courage, others see her as a traitor who exposed the system's flaws, putting everyone's reputation at risk. Emily, however, is no longer alone. Dr. Richard Lawson and Harold Bennett remain by her side, along with a growing number of staff and patients who have chosen to publicly support her. She feels that, despite the adversities, she is building something bigger, a new foundation for more humane and ethical medicine. The climax approaches when Emily is called to testify at a public hearing, organized by the Massachusetts State Health Committee. The hearing will be broadcast live, with millions of people watching, and will be your chance to present all the evidence you have gathered and make a direct call for healthcare reform. The night before the hearing, Emily is in her apartment, alone with her thoughts. She reviews her notes, aware that every word she says the next day could have monumental repercussions. She feels the weight of responsibility on her shoulders, but also a sense of clarity and purpose that she has never experienced before. However, the pressure mounts when Emily receives an anonymous phone call. The voice on the other end of the line is cold and threatening, making it clear that if she continues with her testimony, there will be personal consequences for her and her loved ones. The threat is direct. "You could lose more than just your career, Dr. Carson." For a moment, the fear returns in full force. Emily considers giving up, backing down before it's too late. But when she looks at Sarah's letter and the star necklace she never takes off her neck, she finds the strength she needs. "I can't let fear control me," she thinks. "I promised myself and Sarah that I would fight for this, and I'm not stopping now." On the day of the hearing, the room is full. Journalists, lawyers, patients, and members of the public are present, all eager to hear what Emily has to say. She is nervous but determined. At her side, Dr. Lawson and Harold Bennett encourage her with supportive looks. When it is her turn to speak, Emily stands up and walks to the lectern. The room falls silent and she feels the weight of thousands of eyes on her. She begins her statement with a personal narrative, telling Sarah's story and how this journey led her there. His words are full of emotion but also of unshakable firmness. As he presents the evidence and describes the unethical practices he uncovered, the room is filled with palpable tension. The committee members, initially skeptical, begin to realize the seriousness of the accusations. Emily is meticulous, pointing out every flaw in the system, every cover-up, every life lost to greed and neglect. During her testimony, the hospital's lawyers try to interrupt her, questioning her credibility and motivations. But Emily is undeterred. She responds to each attempt to discredit her with facts and evidence, making it clear that her fight is not just for justice for Sarah, but for all patients who have been betrayed by a flawed system. The culmination of the climax comes when, in a moment of pure honesty, Emily makes a direct appeal to the committee members and the audience watching at home. She talks about the true purpose of medicine, about the responsibility to care for human lives with dignity and respect, and about the urgent need to reform the system so that tragedies like the one she witnessed never happen again. This is not just a moment of punishment but of redemption, she says, her voice firm and her gaze determined. We have the opportunity to turn pain into change, to ensure that every patient receives the care they deserve, without fear of being abandoned by a system that puts profits over lives. When he finishes his testimony, the room remains silent for a few seconds before being broken by supportive applause. Emily feels tears fill her eyes, not with sadness, but with relief and hope. She knows that no matter what happens next, she did what needed to be done. The consequences of the testimony are immediate. The hospital is placed under interim administration, and a broader federal investigation is launched, leading to the dismissal of several administrators and doctors involved in the cover-ups. Emily's suggested reforms begin to be publicly debated, and a new era of transparency and accountability begins to emerge in medicine. For Emily, the path ahead is still uncertain. Her medical career is at an inflection point, and she knows she may never get back to the way she was before. But as she walks out of the hearing room, surrounded by her supporters, she feels an inner peace she hasn't experienced in a long time. She looks up at the sky, where the sun begins to set, dyeing everything a golden hue. Touching the star necklace around her neck, Emily smiles, knowing she has finally found her way back to what really matters. The days following the public hearing are a mix of chaos and hope for Emily. The media continues to cover the hospital scandal, but the narrative begins to change. The focus stops being just the corrupt practices revealed and starts to include the reforms proposed by Emily and other professionals dedicated to transforming the system. Emily still faces considerable challenges. Despite public support, there are those in the medical community and at the hospital who see it as a threat. Some of her former colleagues avoid her, while others accuse her of destroying their careers. She becomes the target of lawsuits from the hospital administration and doctors involved in the cover-ups. However, Emily refuses to be intimidated. With the help of lawyers and patient rights activists, Emily begins work on implementing the reforms. She joins a group of professionals who share her vision, forming a coalition that fights for greater transparency, ethics, and humanity in medicine. Together, they begin to push for legislative changes that guarantee better hospital practices and protection for doctors who report irregularities. During this process, Emily also begins to heal the internal wounds she has carried for so long. She reconnects with the reason she chose medicine in the first place, her passion for helping others, and her belief that every life is precious. This renewal of purpose strengthens her, allowing her to deal with adversity in a more resilient way. The city of Boston also responds to the revelations with a wave of solidarity. Patients and their families organize vigils and rallies in support of the changes Emily is promoting. She becomes a respected public figure, not just as a doctor, but as a tireless advocate for patients' rights. However, Emily's journey isn't just about work. The meeting with Harold Bennett and the memory of Sarah continue to play a crucial role in his life. Harold, now a close friend and confidant, helps Emily remember that the fight she has begun is not just for justice but also for healing, for others and for herself. In a moment of introspection, Harold shares with Emily a last message left by Sarah. In a short recording he kept for himself, a weak Sarah says, "Grandpa, if you ever meet Dr. Carson, tell her to never stop believing. Even though the world seems broken, there is always a way to fix it one step at a time." These words resonate deeply with Emily, strengthening her resolve even further. She realizes that, despite all the difficulties, she is on the right path. The fight is hard, but the results are already starting to appear, and most importantly, she finds peace in knowing that she is honoring Sarah's memory in the best way possible, creating a legacy of change and compassion. Over the following months, the reforms advocated by Emily begin to be implemented, not only in the hospital where it all began, but in other institutions that are inspired by her courage. She becomes a national reference, being invited to speak at conferences and participate in working groups that define the future of medicine in the United States. Even with all this notoriety, Emily remains humble. always remembering Sarah's words and Harold's support. She knows that the fight for justice and humanity in medicine is ongoing, and she is ready to face each new challenge that arises. Ultimately, Emily decides it's time to take the next step in her life. Although she still works as a doctor, she also chooses to dedicate herself to advocacy in defense of patients' rights and promoting systemic reforms in the healthcare sector. This new phase of her career fills her with satisfaction and brings her even closer to her goal of creating a fairer and more compassionate healthcare system. In the last scene, Emily visits Sarah's grave in a peaceful cemetery surrounded by trees and flowers. She places the star necklace on the grave, a gesture of gratitude and respect. "Thank you, Sarah," she whispers with a serene smile, "for showing me the way, even when I was lost." As Emily walks away, the sun begins to set over the horizon, turning the sky golden. She knows that the journey is still far from over, but now she walks with the certainty that, regardless of the challenges that arise, she is prepared to face them, one step at a time. 2 years have passed since the day Emily Carson exposed her hospital's corrupt practices in a public hearing. The transformation she initiated continues to reverberate throughout the medical community and beyond. Thanks to his tireless work and the coalition he formed with other professionals, medicine in the United States is beginning to move in a more ethical and humane direction. Emily now divides her time between her work as a critical care physician and her new passion for advocacy for patients' rights. She actively participates in initiatives that seek to reform the healthcare system, giving lectures at universities, leading working groups, and advising other doctors facing similar ethical dilemmas. Harold Bennett, who became a great friend and mentor, continues to be by Emily's side, offering emotional support and wise advice. He has also become involved in social causes, sharing his granddaughter Sarah's story at awareness events and helping to raise funds for organizations that promote palliative care and support for terminally ill patients. Emily's influence is felt across the country. New protocols are adopted, hospitals become more transparent, and patients' voices gain more weight in medical decisions. Many healthcare professionals who previously feared speaking out about the system's internal problems now find the courage to speak out, inspired by Emily's example. In her personal life, Emily finds a balance that previously seemed impossible. She learned to take care of herself, to seek support when needed, and to value small moments of joy and tranquility. The connection she established with Sarah's memory guides her through her moments of doubt, constantly reminding her why she chose this journey. In the end, Emily again visits the cemetery where Sarah is buried, as she does every year on the anniversary of her death. This time, she doesn't come alone. By her side is a group of young doctors and lawyers who were inspired by her story and now work together to continue the legacy of change that Emily started. As the group gathers around Sarah's grave, Emily talks to them about the importance of compassion, courage, and persistence in fighting for a more equitable healthcare system. "Never forget," she says, her voice thick with emotion, "that every small action can make a big difference, and that, even in the darkest hours, there is always a star to guide us." The sun begins to set, and the group remains silent, reflecting on Emily's words and the impact Sarah had on their lives, even after death. Emily moves away from the group a little, looking at the horizon, feeling at peace. She knows that the fight never truly ends, but now more than ever she is ready to face whatever comes. And with Sarah's memory as her guiding star, she walks confidently into the future, knowing that with every step, she is helping to build a better world.